Wait, aren't you older?
Yeah, but I'm smaller. And she did have to teach me how to be a wolf. So it's debated.
Granny Smith nearly killed you!
No, she didn't, Appleblom. Remember, too many ponies. As a wolf, I'm the villain. Remember how your sisters were when they first saw me?
Yeah.
And so, Midnight had a family again. Well, sort of. While Starling had been willing to forgive her, Powder had not been as accepting. Though she was finally talking with Midnight again, Midnight could easily tell Powder was not that trusting towards her as she used to be. The Changeling would often be less interested to seek her out, spend time with her, and even still flat out ignore her a bit. Starling had said she would need a long time to trust Midnight again, which saddened the Purple Wolf greatly. Starling had reassured her that it would be eventually alright. But Midnight was sad not everything would be the way it was before. Once Starling was able to stand and move around without falling over, which took a surprisingly 2 days, Midnight left for a short bit to grab all her stuff from her old cave and move them to her spot in Starling's home. While Starling did remind her every so often that hay, at the very most, was the wolf way, Midnight explained to her that this was her way. Starling, through either tiredness or acceptance, allowed Midnight to use it, only on the condition she remembered the most important rule, that you are not a pony, and as sweet Celestia did she ever remember it. Midnight had made painstaking efforts to avoid the towns as much as possible, even to the point of not even their animals, or even close enough to hear or see the town. It did mean she had to hunt on the side of Darling's mountains that had larger prey, but it was worth it to avoid being muzzled again. Over the next week of Starling's waking up, Powder had kept a close eye on her. She had never nagged Starling about getting food or resting, but she did remind her every now and again to take it easy. Starling agreed, as her muscles were stiff and sore from laying down all the time, but still tried to get back in a routine. This routine, Midnight realised, might be better not to include her in it. Though she couldn't explain it, she would often find herself staring out to the horizon and wondering what was beyond those lands. Midnight felt confident in herself ever since she had finally come to terms with herself being a real wolf, and no longer a pony. A fire burned in her to see the world, meet new animals, and most importantly, with the new strength she never knew she had, seek out the strange pony who had made her this way all those centuries ago. Midnight could feel it consume her every waking moment, and even her dreams at times, as her paws burned for something new. Soon, a week turned into 2, and 2 into almost a month, before Midnight finally made her decision. It was time for her to move on and travel alone. She felt bad leaving again after she had just gotten settled back into the den, but she knew this was for the best. Waiting until everyone was fast asleep one night, Midnight carefully packed all her stuff in a bag that Powder had given her, including the blankets and pillow, and once again walked quietly out of the front of the cave. She wanted to say goodbye to everyone, but with Powder still not trusting her, and Starling still very busy catching up with all the work she put off while she was resting, she had hoped they would understand if she quietly slipped out. However, Midnight would learn that this was not the case. "You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you, sis?" Starling said from the back of the cave. Midnight turned and smiled shyly, before running over and giving her sis a hug, which the winged wolf reciprocated. Before she could speak, Starling beat her to it. "I don't like it too much, you leaving here when you just got back home, but I know how insistent the call can be." "The call?" Midnight asked, confused by this new term. "Yeah, the call," Starling continued, as she walked to the edge of the cave ledge and looked out at the horizon. Midnight followed her actions. "We wolves are nomads. We settle down at times, and yes, we have our territory, But even then, we travel in that territory to new sections. We never sit down, especially when we are young. You've got to do it, and so do I, Starling said with a smile at the purple wolf. Midnight smiled back at her before thinking about all the new places and wagging her tail in excitement. Starling chuckled as she walked back down the tunnels and quickly brought a bag filled with glittering gems and one large tanzanite gem. Starling said to only use it when she came to a large land filled with adult dragons and white cliff sides, and ask for one called Dragon Lord Tanzanite. The winged wolf gave her a wink before the purple wolf bowed her head and ran off into the night, a howl letting loose in excitement, and returned by one as well. So a new adventure began for Midnight. At first it was tiring, having to push all her skills to the limit to help her to survive. But the outcome was worth it. Once she was out of Equestria, she saw new mountains, lands, towns, and places she could only dream of existing. She learned and experienced all from digging gems with real diamond dogs to hearing the sirens call from a good distance away. She even found a great griffin town that had a unique interest in alchemy and taught her how to use the arts of sorcery. She even at times saw places Starling had been, and beings of long life who remembered her passing through and helping out. Some would even treat Midnight to a meal to hear how the young pup, as many called her, was doing. Something Midnight would keep in her mind for later. She stayed in some towns, like that of the alchemy griffins, for what seemed like months, when in reality it was years. When 50 years had come and gone, Midnight finally decided to find this Dragon Lord Tanzanite and see why Starling had told her to seek him out. Though it took her many a moon to find the land, when she finally found it, its amazement struck her like a hammer to a nail. The white-cliffed Dragonland was impressive. Tall peaks of what she guessed was limestone touching the sky. Dragons of every size flying around, and even great elder dragons singing songs from times long gone. Before she could make more than a few pause steps into the territory, however, a large trio of armoured guard dragons came down to surround her. She begged and pleaded that she was sent by a friend and dumped her gem sack, which had gotten bigger with her adding to it every now and again, in front of the guards. They stared amazed a bit at the different gems and seemed to listen to Midnight. She demanded to see the Dragon Lord of the land, and see him she did. Tanzanite was a strong adult dragon, with the colour he was named after glistening on him. As he listened to Midnight, she noticed him smile and laugh when she mentioned Starling had sent her with a Tanzanite gem. Midnight had thought the dragon was laughing at Midnight, when in reality she found it was laughter of good memories he and Starling apparently shared. She welcomed Midnight as a special guest of the land and got her started on a certain language she had always wanted to learn: Dragonese. Midnight was confused as to why, as Tanzanite had put it, would take years of study, until she saw the alphabet. Not only were there 26 letters in the alphabet, but there was also a 48 characters on just growling, not to mention the special set of snarling, roaring, and everything else. Midnight did the best she could, but unfortunately growing up in learning Pony really caused issues with her in understanding the language. Tanzanite encouraged her at times, even reminding her to take breaks and see events in the land, like coming-of-age ceremonies and races. Midnight enjoyed those breaks, and tried to learn all she could, but mostly she did try and focus solely on learning the language. In her time there, Midnight never got a fluent grasp of it, but she was proud that she understood pretty well the alphabet and some of the words in Dragonland. Over time, Tanzanite would even tell her stories of Starling's time in the land, and even how they met, making Midnight laugh at all the problems Starling had when she came to the land. But her and Tanzanite also bonded a bit, to the point of mutual understanding, and enjoyed retelling stories of their times together, with other dragons who came by. However, soon enough, the call sounded again to Midnight, this time to see the old crew again. Midnight said her goodbyes to Tanzanite and thanked him for all he did. In turn, Tanzanite wished her well on her travels and told her to give old little pup his regards, another nickname Midnight was going to keep right in her memory for later. Though the two were really more like acquaintances than friends by this point, Midnight still felt sad leaving Tanzanite and promised to keep up with her lessons. With a swift pack-up and a nose to the wind, Midnight left the Dragonlands and finally made her way back home. The trek home was far shorter than when Midnight started her journey, mostly in part because Midnight was going straight home and did not get sidetracked like she had before. Much like when she had left Equestria, was almost sure to be careful to avoid any and all ponies she could. She kept to the forests, offering food for protection for mythics in her crossing, and even jumping secretly into pony carts to get quickly from time to time. Eventually though, days and days of travel, Midnight managed to get back to the old forest she had called home all those years ago, and smiled happily at the memories that came flooding in. The training, her time with Luna, her nights she was on her own. Midnight could not believe all that had stayed the same, or the vast amounts of time that had changed. In the few years since she had left, Midnight had seen the town now tripled in size, removing a huge amount of the forest that Midnight had once hunted in. A sad sigh escaped her as she walked through the tree edge to observe the ponies in peace. Most of them she had never seen before, which made sense since considering the time that had passed. But what Midnight found more interesting was none of the elder ponies even seemed familiar to her. Midnight wondered what Powder and Starling could have done that one fateful night, but decided not to ponder it too much, to save her peace of mind. After travelling a much shorter distance than she remembered, Midnight soon found herself back in similar woods, with a smile spreading as she was excited to see her old friends again. As she got close to the edge of their territory, Midnight suddenly stopped when her nose and ears picked up a crashing beast rampaging through the forest directly at her. She growled and stood her ground, when she gawked and saw a massive pride of manticores roaring down at her. This threw Midnight through a huge loop as she tried to figure out what had caused this pride to come after her when a howl let out from behind the pride. Midnight got excited as she recognized that howl and saw Powder, Starling, and Bandit coming racing towards her. At first she saw they all held angered faces, as if they were ready to attack her, but the closer they got, the more their reactions changed. Bandit's and Starling's a look of joy, and Powder's one of confusion. Midnight's eyes widened as she saw the 50 years had done to them. Starling, she was now a full adult, and looked a little taller, and had more stronger wings and legs. Bandit was also a little bigger, and looked a little more adult. The only one who looked the same was Powder, which made the Purple Wolf wonder about the changing lifespan, and if the time that passed had finally had her forgive the Purple Wolf for her actions all those years ago. As Starling barked at the manticore, they soon gave a small bow and wandered away along the borders once again. Soon Starling came bounding up, tail wagging as she nuzzles and hugged Midnight, the tanuki following her owner's actions. While Midnight noticed that Powder had stopped charging to her and slowed to a stop by the place of the manticores, the changeling gave the Purple Wolf a smile before greeting her. Midnight could tell that while Starling and Bandit were definitely okay with her now, the changeling would still need time to gain her trust again, something Midnight sadly had to accept, even if she had hoped things were fixed now. Starling soon finished her greeting to her small sis and laughed as she made remarks about she wondered if she had gotten eaten or something. Midnight jested that nothing could take her down before a smirk was on Starling's face, and she reminded Midnight of the town's ponies, which made Midnight blush and the rest laugh. Soon after greetings were made, the four beasts walked back and caught each other up on everything. Midnight talked about where she had gone in her travels, like meeting the Dragon Lord, unique beasts, and the alchemy griffins. Starling and Powder had fought off beast hunters who threatened everyone in the forest, became the guardians of the land, and even had increased their territory to almost the entire forest now. Both of them even shared a mutual desire to see each other again, like some tug on their minds. But what Midnight didn't know was the great surprise that awaited her when they managed to climb up the cliffside and jump into the entrance. A surprise that made her jaw drop and her eyes go wide. "You want me to look after the what?" Midnight asked in surprise. "The cave, Furhead," Powder said jokingly, as she tightened the straps on the harness Starling was putting on. "I need to go back to my homeland to figure out what this pardon is about, and see what has come of the land. Besides," Starling said as she slipped in between the additional cart harness, "either you watch it or leave the cave to be taken over by any manner of beasts." But, I've never done something like this before. I'm no guardian," Midnight asked frantically, as Powder and the others continued to pack up stuff on their long journey to the wildlands. Midnight trotted up and sat beside Starling, letting out a small whine. "Can't you stay?" Starling gave her a caring look and chuckled to the purple wolf. "I am sure you'll be fine. Besides," Starling said as she nuzzled Midnight, "you're a wolf. You can face any challenge, remember?" Midnight let out a small sad sigh as she hugged Starling back and gave her a small nuzzle too, hoping that the winged wolf would change her mind any minute now. To her dismay, Powder trotted over with a big thick scroll and dropped it at the purple wolf's feet. "These are all of our chores and work we have to do every week. Take it one step at a time and do your best. Also," Powder said as she tossed Bandit up into the cart, "if any of the beasts around here should question you, just say you're the temporary guardian. They should have no problems with you after that." Powder jumped into the cart herself and gave her sis, Starling, a smile before nodding. "Let's hit the road like old times, okay?" Starling nodded happily before pushing Midnight a little bit back and giving her a small smile. Before she could take off, though, Midnight jumped up and barked. "Wait!" she cried. Powder and Starling stared at her, a little surprised, and waited for what the purple wolf had to ask. "How long will you be going for? How long will you be gone? A month? Half a year? What?" Starling and Powder turned to look at each other sadly before sighing, and muttered something Midnight could not hear. Before she could press forward, Starling winded up almost and bolted out of the cave with a howl. Soon she and the cart were soaring into the sky, the changeling waving back to her and calling out loudly, "Follow the list!" Midnight watched them fly off into the night sky, and she whined as she waited for them to disappear into the distance. Midnight knew they weren't ignoring her by those actions, but knew they were trying to avoid telling her the one obvious fact they told through their actions. They would be gone for years, or maybe they may never be back. And so, once again, Midnight was alone. For the first month, Midnight thought she had entered into Tartarus with the deal she had made. All of the mythics around her did not believe Starling had asked Midnight to be their temporary guardian, and tried to kill her for lying to them. But soon enough, and with the aid of a hidden note Midnight found written approval for Midnight being there, from Starling herself, something she was sure Starling had saved in the cave, in case Midnight had possibly come back. Once the animals of the forest had begrudgingly accepted her, she moved on to the next task of adapting to everything. From animals in need of medical care to protect the border, to trying and failing a lot at defending others from wandering predators. Midnight might not have been the best guardian at first, but in time she grew more and more adaptive. She used her speed and size to dodge and then take down opponents, or use her environment to fight them off. She managed to use the birds to spy over areas out of the border and inform her of anyone new coming. She even made bribes to neighbouring pet hunter dogs to lead their ponies away from anyone in the protecting of the land. A month turned into 2, then 4, then almost a year, as Midnight became more confident in her skills and in herself as a guardian. It was after a year of her guardianship did Midnight manage to get into a routine to give herself time to relax, and finally read some of the books in the library. And read she did. With her basic knowledge of Dragonese, she finally could read and translate into Pony on paper what she had found in the cave. For pointers she knew was useful to her, healing potions, recipes, animal specifics, even politics used to heal bone and other major injuries. But as she read through more of the basic story and the medical books, she soon found some were things far more interesting to her than stories. Magic. Magic had always been something of an interest to Midnight, for clearly obvious reasons. Whether it was a fix to her curse, or just to find out about the pony who did this to her. Midnight had wanted so badly to learn as much as she could about the topic. The books told of some magical artifacts, some even logged to be resting in this very home, and others out amongst the wood to be held for careful protection. Over the next 3 years, Midnight studied the books and magic, carefully making her own books from loose-leafed paper and string, tying them together. She worked, toiled, and even discovered things not even Starling had, gaining more and more knowledge with every passing year. Halfway through her 4th year as a guardian, however, Midnight discovered one of the most important parts of her research: the mirror pool. Through the books, she had learned the mirror pool was a magical potion that, when a drop had been added to a surrounding body of water, the water was able to duplicate anything that entered with the aid of a magic phrase. As the purple wolf grew more and more interested, an idea sprung into her mind. This pool could be her freedom from the curse. Midnight spent the next few months pouring as much free time into finding and studying and testing the powers of the mirror pool that was in the forest. Her hope grew with every passing success, and she was sure she had finally found a way to break her curse of immortality, and maybe even be a pony once more. She had no ill will of wolves, or all she had learned. She loved the family she had now, but she did not know how long all 3 would live, and couldn't face the heartache again of knowing they would die. Even if Luna came back, or if Powder could outlive with her, as an immortal too she was, she still could not bear the thought of having to see any of them die before her. So, as selfish as it may sound, Midnight took what she could one night, when the moon was full, and went to the mirror pool. It took her time to make her way to the pool, with all the vials, potions, and other items she had with her, but in time, she eventually made it over to the mossy pool she had been studying so carefully and smiled. Though it was a dangerous magical item in the wrong hands, it was a beautiful sight, with water shimmering like gems and the quietness that any beast could meditate in with no worries. Soon, she prepared her station for the task at Paw, hoping nothing horrible would happen to her or the cave because of this. She laid out every item carefully before smiling and almost giggling at the thought of being a pony again. After laying everything out, she started a small fire near the pool, and picking up a pot she had brought, and carefully, without touching the water herself, gathered some of the water and placed it beside the fire. With a little difficulty, she put up the 2 cooking poles and set the pot to hang between them. As the water bubbled in the metal pot, Midnight carefully grabbed potion after potion and added them one by one into the pot, each reaction going perfectly until, with bated breath, she waited to see if she had added the right amount of her experiment to be a success. In a heartbeat, the boiling water went from a clear, glistening silver to a bright gold. Midnight let out a cheer as she sighed and steadied herself for the final part of the potion. Taking a spare knife from the cave, Midnight made a small cut at the bottom of one of her pads. It only hurt for a second or two, before Midnight got all the blood she needed and hovered the knife over the pot. She knocked it on the side a bit so a few drops fell into the pot, and saw them fizz in the bubbling water. The fizz suddenly grew and grew as Midnight stared with eyes wide that, while once excited, were now stricken with fear. As she backed up a few tail lengths as the fizzing grew louder and louder, shooting her to the other. She covered her eyes and ears with her paws as she felt a loud explosion shoot up and shooting her into the other side of the mirror pool wall. When she looked back up again, the mixture had shot up and made a hole in the roof, far bigger than what was already there. The pot had surprisingly stayed in one piece, even if it was somehow now in the mirror pool itself and sinking to the bottom of it. But all her papers, vials, and everything else she had written down, over the last few years were now on fire like the surrounding land. Midnight ran back over and tried desperately to catch it, but it was too late. The pot sank into the water, sending a few bubbles up as it sank further and further. "No!" Midnight screamed, as she watched all her hard work either go up in flames or sink to the bottom of the pool. She tried to see if chanting the verse would work, but nothing seemed to work, and she dared not jump in herself. There was a slight fizz for a second that drew Midnight's hopes back up, only for it to sink again as soon the water became calm once more. She sat there, careful to avoid the fire and glass, as a few tears fell from her eyes and hit the floor. She was so close. So Celestia dang close, now she was out of ideas to escape her curse and form. As she sat and cried a little, she left the cave, not bothering to pick up any of the burnt or broken items, and just focusing on getting back home to her bed to rest all the stress off. However, if Midnight had been paying attention, she would have noticed something bubbled from the water. The bubbling continued more and more as a paw slowly moved out from the water and quietly gripped the edge of the pool. Then, the being pulled herself up, a slightly darkish purple coat covering it as it shook the water from its fur, and stood up. It looked at where Midnight had exited from, and cruelly grinned as it watched in silence. If Midnight had maybe listened more, she might have been able to hear another set of paw prints following her back to the cave, or the swishing of a different tail eagerly following her behind. Midnight might even have noticed a strange wet fur smell in the air if she had raised her nose up to smell, but she didn't. Midnight did none of these things, and only focused on heading home and her bed. But soon, that would not be the only thing Midnight would have to focus on tonight.